suggest that you go there. And in the Ibirapuera Park, there are another 3 or 4, another 2 museums of contemporary art. So you can really spend maybe 2 or 3 days just going museums there. So if you have time, you should go. Take your time to go there. And now I pass to Rui, maybe.
Just a quick note to everyone that's going to present at 2 o'clock, if they can arrive maybe 15 to 20 minutes to the room so we can set everything and test if the presentations are all right. So we have a bit of time just to have everything ready before the presentation starts at 2. Yeah, that's it for me. Okay, yeah, I just want to welcome you, everyone here. It's been an honor to to get to know you, even at a distance through email, and to get to contact you and to read your papers. So it's been an amazing opportunity, and I really hope that you enjoy your stay here. And if you have any doubt regarding the conference or regarding the city, or if there's something that I can help, please don't hesitate to, to, to come to me. Okay? Guess that's it.
Just for those who could not register, they'll be open all day. So maybe during lunchtime or the breaks, you should go there and make your registration. Okay? Okay, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the conference. And I'd like to present Rodolfo Caesar, very friend of mine, who is a professor at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. Thank you.
Obrigado. Eu tenho... Agradeço. Good morning. Thanks for coming. I thank you very much for Nusson, who invited me. I'm very honored to be one of the 4 keynote speakers. It's quite a responsibility for me. And I thank Sesky too. And okay. I'm very happy to see that Sonologia is like that now. Some years ago, we were a very small group. Now it's really amazing. It's very touching to see. So thank you. So if I don't mind, I will read because it's easier for me. It's in English. It's a very lousy English. It's my English, so I beg your pardon twice. So, não entrou. Aqui tem que estar aqui. Vídeo tá onde? Ele antes foi. Mira, tá certo. Deveria tentar mais uma vez. Sorry, free time. Agora liguei. Não, espera aí que eu reiniciei. Aproveito para beber água. Não. Não. Deveria ter entrado já aqui. Ah, peraí. entro. Obrigado. Está ao contrário. Saiu, entrou. Agora sim. Vai. Está acontecendo, hein? É. Não, mas ele reconheceu ainda há pouco. Mas aparece, sai. Tem. Tava funcionando. Não, ele estava funcionando ainda há pouco. Qual? Não. Tá vendo? Ele aparece. Mas ele dá outra. Oi. Hum. Tá, mas eu não tô. Ah, tá aqui. Sorry for. So I will talk about a feedback loop involving electroacoustic devices and my own perception, which resulted in the discovery of something that was all the time in front of me. And I will use the notion of technographic traces, attempting to describe processes in which technologies reveal some sort of subjectivity. Drawing analogies with the rocking of trains and altered states of consciousness, as in Paul Valéry's Prose and in Cartesian rationalism, the main objective is to testify again on technology's role in shaping perception and understanding. I will also comment on how music composition and sound art may be affected. So, uh, the whole idea comes from the very beginning of my research in composition, which will cross two lines. So this text here results from the crossing of these lines of research I have been busy with for some time. The first deals with what we listen from the so-called nature, and the second, the interaction between music and technologies. The title I have been using to describe my recent research resumes on how and where I have been placing my curiosity and my own work. Listening between the animal and the robot. I will first describe one of the founding examples of my interest concerning the animal sounding expression, which is the analysis and synthesis of ametric sounds produced by anurans and insects. As many composers like myself intrigue not only with ornithology, from Vivaldi to Messiaen, but with animal sounds in general, like Tato Taborda. And because I deal mainly with electroacoustic media, I became interested in the rhythmic patterns of frogs, crickets, cicada, etc. The sample that triggered my curiosity shows two microphonically aparted frogs doing their perhaps unintentional number, going in and out of sync. Saiu? Oh dear. Tá lá, agora apareceu. É, deve ser o cara. Pode ir. Okay. So this is the graphic showing two frogs, one here and another here. The sounds of each one were crossing the microphone so that we have this one is making a small, not me, é o cabo. Ok. Ah, maravilha. Maravilha. Vou experimentar o som. Aqui, é. Uhum. Vamos testar o som. Tá sem som. Espera aí. Eu só vou pegar aqui. Tá. Já tá. Ah, é? Ah, é? Ah, tá. Qual? Headphones? Hum, só que aumentar o volume. Deveria ter. Aí, aí. Tá, tá ótimo. É, mas tá com ruído. Ok. Sorry for the noise. I will play with noise. Sorry, number 6. Okay. So these were the two frogs, and they were playing together, or I don't know if it was intentional or not. The fact is that they are, at the beginning, they are in sync, and in the end, no sound now. Hein? Não, não, não. Well, I will simulate the two frogs. So they pick, 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 and then they, at the beginning they are together, and after 30 seconds they are completely out of phase, and then 30 seconds after they come together again. So this was for me a very interesting and musical subject because it's a rhythm which is easy to listen to, but very difficult to write with usual notation. So electroacoustic writing is able to do that. And then I was able to play. Vai ter som agora? No. No. So because electroacoustic technique is capable of doing this rhythm easily, I made a simulation, which we are not going to listen, but I can simulate too, which is exactly like the first. Okay, so if you remember, so in what's here? Ah, okay. In 1973, John Chowning invented a prolific way of using frequency modulation for musical purposes. He transposed the mathematical model from its usual finality as a radio waves communication tool. What he did was a transposition of the speed of frequencies and the replacement of the radio waves medium to the acoustic one, thus enabling the building of rich musical timbre, unavailable through the subtractive and additive methods employed at the time. Following my compositional purposes of rhythmic patterns, I transposed Chowning's transposition one step further by reducing the device's operator's velocities to one other dimension, so as to have frequencies located below the audio spectrum, what resulted in a rich way of building durations otherwise too complicated to write by means of graphic notation. The next examples will show two different interpretations of what the natural world played to my ears, made possible via FM, frequency modulation. It's the same idea, but we have 5 different frogs, and the speed is not really uh, the natural one. It's the same proceeding, same process. And this was the process. So if we have this shape here, which follows this function, this function uh, accelerates the amount of grains, and it also augments volume and the curve and the pitch dimension. So if you apply this curve to the same curve, it will have something like that. So I play both. Okay, the main and the result. So, well, until now, I described the presence of two different tools stemming from recent technologies involved in a process of knowledge, audio recording and synthesis. It will become more complicated from now on. I will speak about technography, what I intend as technography. It has always been a concern to me to be aware as to the use of technologies, trying to know each device's own peculiarities, their full capacities. For a composer, the introduction of recording and synthesis technologies in music composition should be justified, meaning that such or such use would be acceptable whenever new machines wouldn't merely replace more expensive and or older technologies like musical instruments. Such criteria responded to ethical attempts in avoiding to thread into the professional fields of fellow instrumentalists and musicians. But there are aesthetical and more general issues as well. The acritical use of new technologies in electroacoustic music hid another no less serious issue when composers composed pieces reliant on effects designed by invisible programmers, whose part in the authenticity was seldom, if ever, mentioned. On a more philosophical stance, Willem Flusser's on writing, complexity, and technical revolutions, which is a YouTube film, is very clear on this subject. It was perhaps symptomatic of an urge to reach universality that theories of listening, inaugurated by Pierre Schaeffer in 1966, briefly mention but never give deserving places to a technological listening, a technical listening, that would attempt to analyze by which means one or other effects are produced. For this matter, to animate a criticism towards the amnesia of the technical debt, to reach the composer's insouciance, especially when his choices are so clearly inspired by the special effect one or other device offered, I decided to point to something bigger than the composer, calling this presence the strong action of technology. In Schaeffer's traité, technical listening does not contain a conceptual tool for criticism, as does his notion of art relais, uh, like Palombini translated and published, uh, written in 1939, 40, 41. Yeah. And technical listening is diverted in Smalley's spectromorphology in 1986. It is easy to exemplify these effects in the field of audiovisual and TV, choosing a technography very likely to be remembered by ourselves because it became an unbearable cliché on many films, videos, and advertisements from the 90s, which is morphing. So, this is already as outdated uh, uh, as the joke I was trying to make. Okay. So interestingly, but not at all coincidentally, this very example illustrates an article about a computer program dedicated to sound morphing for compositional purposes. It is the trick whereby one can gradually move from one timbre to a different one without interruption or superposition of the note. There were transformations from a bee buzz to the rumor of a crowd, or from a choir's voice to the spectrum of a church bell. Musical achievements of very reputed composers, but whose software only few of them really understood how to have access. It was Flusser's belief that art should avoid being stupid by means of knowing and really using technology in the process of making the art object. Perhaps Flusser didn't realize at the time that digital arts would be developed, trying to overcome his fears concerning the conscience of the process. But this knowledge would not become an aesthetic solution, since audiences for this art will need the same degree of technological knowledge in order to decode its products. More recently, after becoming less interested in artworks and concerts and helped by the readings of authors concerned with media technology, my focuses acquired a less humanistic view. Instead of trying to see the man behind the machine, I started to see a bit closer man's mixture with technology's own subjectivity, one that reveals itself through technographic marks. Such authors discuss the properties of technological devices, employing different terminologies: machine, appareil, surface d'inscription, materialities of communication, dispositif, etc. You have Agamben, Deot, Gumbrecht, Pfeiffer, Michel Serres, Bernard Stiegler, etc. It is out of my reach in this text to find out which among them is the most adequate, or to subscribe to the most persuasive theory. In order to legitimate this work to which I am devoted, I just wish to make myself as clear as possible in the description of an experience, which is above all a practice. Sorry. Despite the fact that there are electronic audio media involved in the article's title, the expression feedback does not refer exclusively to the technographic traces left on captured and re-amplified sound, such like, for instance, Jimi Hendrix fabricated on stage. The guitar player experimented different distances between the guitar and the speakers, which acted simultaneously as sources and reproducers of sound. The precise technographic mark I would like to describe lies on a more extended loop in matter and in time. The expression feedback is also metaphorical because it will translate not only what sort of connections acted in my own use of machines, but how much it involved my body and conscience as well, as they became part of the physical material experience. It is a case where the feedback circulated between my understanding and an electroacoustic device, adding a little bit of knowledge to my ornithological unfamiliarity. And I will make this as an explanation, an exposition about this, and then I will propose examples in broader areas. But first, I need to explain the recurrent use of quotes, as in nature and music. I wish to make clear that I find it increasingly difficult to establish clear boundaries, especially whenever music appears, its practice and its knowledge. Such vagueness permeates the whole text and the research with which I have been busy. The sounding animal world is plentiful of conceptual challenges, for it supposedly expresses non-musical conditions, one which I don't want to judge. Thus, the use of floating concepts became a recurrent medium in my professional life, stimulated by the connection with contemporary music, especially electroacoustic music, the music of all sounds, and with fine arts in general, which, during the second half of the last century, or more precisely, even since Marcel Duchamp and Dada, created repertoires where the establishment of limits is cheerfully complex. Therefore, quotes here are not ironically intended. They just mean a dynamic use of words. Instead of trying to solve complex themes like humanity, animality, and machine, where limits are more and more questioned, I will only try to describe the radical alteration in attitude during a research taken between the years 2011 and 2014. The feeling of being part of a feedback loop has happened thanks to what I came to understand as electroacoustic literacy. For literacy, I understand the relationship with readings and writing texts using letters and or other symbols. A comparable relation happens when one enters the active participation in a process of audio technology involving pickup, registering, processing, and reproduction. In usual literacy, we are part of a process that mixes at least several materialities. The letter, the written language, paper, pencil to register, and the body, provided with eyes, memory, and conscience to participate in this mixture. With electroacoustic equipment, the process is similar, but not less important to investigate. So, catching the flycatcher. It's a bird. In several regions in Latin America, there is a bird whose vocalizations become fully observable in high summer. It's called iré in Portuguese, certainly because of indigenous way of calling birds. It's based on sound. Uh, each day, Swainson's flycatchers vocalize separate and perhaps randomly 4 or 5 different items, which all sound separate and scattered between dawn and nightfall. I decided to employ the word item instead of biology's usual call, only because I'm not sure how far the bird is really only calling. Perhaps he's having fun. But this is a subject for another article. I don't know if I will ever write. The word item also means that there is a difference between these items. As I went for a fully dedicated animal listening research, I noticed that during the day, some of these items that first appeared to me as if they belong to different birds came actually from one individual. By the end of the evening, one could listen to 5 items grouped together, disposed in a progressive sequence, each one followed by another, all 5 joined in a solo that stands out in the relative silence of the other species. As far as my perception of the Swainson's flycatcher was concerned, I realized I was not the only agent involved. It was a process synchronized with audio recordings and their playbacks, without which I would not have paid enough attention and consequently understand that the 5 items separate before came actually from one and the same individual, until then unknown to me. This experience took place during a survey period held as I went through a postdoctorate research at the Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais in Belo Horizonte, focused on the observation of acoustical animal expressions in forests and savannas near the place I was living. What is remarkable in the Swainson's flycatcher expression is that during its solo, the items line up arranged in a row of increased complexity. There is an evolving model. Following the first, a plain note or a son tonique, as Pierre Schaeffer would describe, the sequence evolves toward a more elaborate son complex. A spectral analysis reinforces this perception. Not yet? No. And again. So an almost straight dash, the note, followed by another in ascending descending curve, another dash, this time followed by a more complex object similar to the second curved item, comes with more extreme energy, and then a trill located above the initial dash, finally leading to the complex mass of sound resolved in a high-pitched frequency modulation. At this point, the flycatcher resumes the cycle, which will only be silenced by the arrival of the nightly darkness. During work sessions in the studio, while listening to recordings, for instance, to sort older items from other individuals of other species taken in other places, I noticed the presence, until then veiled to my ears, of those now identified items of the Swainson's flycatcher. If I always ignore this fellow, now its identification in many recordings jumped to my ears, thanks to a special interest I acquired after identification. One can notice here a slow driving feedback, as if the microphone capsule had first guided my attention to the Swainson's flycatcher solo, and once identified, back to the recognition provided by playback. I don't know if we are going to listen. I know it is there because uh, I became acquainted with this. Uh, it is there, I can assure you. I can assure you, it is there. Hmm? We need to listen it inside a studio. But what I want to say is I only listen to this in this section here because I was acquainted to the bird. I would never be able to detect its presence. Uh, Now I will play a sample recorded back in Rio de Janeiro many years before even I knew the bird existed. What I first thought as being bem TV, the great Kiskadi Pitangus sulfuratus, maybe it might be the flycatcher. I don't know exactly, but it sounds like. It is worth to stress that this act of recognition or even doubt is too a result of the mediation by audio technology. It's not my radio. Okay. I don't know, I'm not sure, but it sounds more or less like. But because birds tend to imitate each other among species, perhaps it is. Anyway, what I want to stress is that I had already a trained ear when I listened to this, years after having recorded it. Okay, now I will come back to my attitude concerning the research, the listening research. As far as selectivity is concerned, The mere use of recording equipment stimulated a different attitude in my objectivity, a sort of protagonism of the electroacoustic circuit operated together with my attention, leading me to get closer to the bird, as well as it was instrumental for the work of putting the items together. Aware of the influence of mediated listening, I posed myself methodological questions on how to start the research, still focused on animal vocalizations, reviewing everything that, until then, had led me to the fieldwork. It became clear that my choices should be put under scrutiny. I am very thankful to the organizers of the Out of Phase event because no other expression describes better my perplexity after this experience. In the beginning of the fieldwork, my attention toward animal vocalizations was directed above all to the search for individuals capable of delivering curious and composable sounding items. That is, presenting musical interest to my ears. Now, taught by the experience with the flycatcher, I acknowledged the reproduction of a colonialist rapport with the exotic in Edward Said's meaning. In the beginning, I went in search of Eastern animals in their distinction from our Western music. The electroacoustic circuit, once placed myself out of phase, helped me at least to be aware of my own subjectivity and to start to pay attention to other less spectacular but nevertheless very interesting vocalizations. To conclude this section, it is as if the cogito, the Cartesian, I think, if I wanted to insist in object-subject polarization, had to be replaced by we think, being this we, constituted by me, the machine involved, the Swainson's flycatcher, the flies, or whoever else, the environment, etc. Once aware of the role of this mixture of agents, if one insists on keeping a scientific objectivity, one needs to participate in a sort of post-Cartesian cogitamus. It is not my intention to persist in any binarity. As for the Dowser's work, no, the attraction that the microphone, uh, the magnetization of the microphone, which was like radiesthesia, direct into the bird, the shotgun microphone, the recorder, and my brain memory, each two at every time expressed in their own ways a mixed media subjectivity that I have been trying to identify whenever technographic traces are detectable. The traces responsible for the flycatcher experience acted very positively for my understanding of an environment, harmony, silence, and other musical stuff that may attract a composer's ears. Sometimes more subtle subjectivities reveal themselves in less obvious media, but may be responsible for unforgettable moments and huge consequences, not only aesthetically speaking, like to begin with examples, the effect of trains on Paul Valéry's writings. Coming back from a stay in Amsterdam, where René Descartes lived 2 centuries earlier, free. Paul Valéry surrenders to the rocking movement of the train, as described in his narrative Retour de Hollande. The rhythm of the wagons induced Valéry into a mediated abstraction. In what he understood as a mental state conducive to Cartesian meditations. Such condition is a clear and abstract mental alertness, stimulating reasoning in its pure state. It happens while the train moves, unattached to cities, their meanings and histories. What matters is the movement between them and its effect. But far from a philosophical style, Valéry's text, made up to describe the condition, plunges us into poetry close to hallucination. This is what the poet had in mind while in Cartesian meditation. It's in Portuguese, but I will read in English. A voyage is an operation that makes cities correspond to hours. Nevertheless, what I consider the most beautiful of it and the most philosophical lies in the intervals between these pauses. Apart from kids, I don't know if there are sincere rail amateurs, adept to the untranslatable train pour le train. I don't see those who would know how to enjoy, as enjoyable is, the roar and the power, the eternity and the rude surprises. Children are the great masters of absolute pleasure. As far as I'm concerned, as soon as the wagon's block start moving, I abandon myself, rocking to a naive metaphysics mixed with myth. I leave Netherlands, and suddenly it seems to me that time starts. Time, another untranslatable, se met en train. The train transforms itself in time's model, from which it takes its rigor and assumes its power. It devours all visible things. It agitates all mental things. With its mass, it attacks brutally the world's face, sending bushes to the devil, houses, provinces. It drops trees, drills arches, expedite posts, collects rudely all lines as they cross, and channels furrows trails. It changes bridges into thunders, cows into projectiles, and the stone structure of its way in a carpet of trajectories. And even the ideas, always surprised, dragged as if stretched by the torrent of visions, modify themselves, like a sound whose origin flies away in the distance. What is very nice for us, sonologists. Okay, comparable to this technographic trace of the train on Valéry's meditation may be the action of chemically altered states during music criticism, as once told by Douglas Kahn. Opening a conference at the fourth annual Activating the Medium Festival 2001, the North American musicologist chronicled an analytical description of his listening experience of a piece of sound of a piece found on a cassette tape. While he was looking for something to entertain himself, Kahn randomly chose a tape lying on his table and put it to play. As he developed a deeper interest in what he listened, Kahn started to exercise a more formal description. After the work had finished, he discovered that the recorded music was not really a musical piece by some composer. It was nothing more than residues on a demagnetized cassette, which previously might have stored a piece by a jazz musician. The demagnetization was not strong enough to erase all acoustic traces from the tape, leaving instead distorted bits of information to a point that made the original unrecognizable. But before listening, Kahn had smoked a known herb capable of producing the effects thus described by him. I quote, euphoria, thought magnification all the way to thought animation, formal structures seen on their own terms, aesthetic experiences, personal and sexual experiences, all brought into high relief. Self and other mix and pull apart. Perspective. I need to reserve the word perspective for further development. Then, Douglas Kahn describes the contents of his listening experience, from which I will extract two paragraphs. The repetitive sweeping set up a pulse which at once related to the pace of the trade-offs from one instrumentalist to the next and to the independent rhythmical elements submerged across the sweep from one moment to the next. There were little recursive eddies, mostly at the trade-offs, which would mark time by almost imperceptibly backing up now and then, and these two were taken up in the momentum of the pulse. This pulse had little in common with those used in some musics, popular and unpopular alike, where they are little more than a mushy metrical backbeat. These were more akin to Chinese pulses, where the beating of the artery might be described as the movement of water sliding over a crack, a man undoing his belt, or someone wishing to wrap something up but lacking the cloth to go all the way around. These were mentioned by an incredulous French physician in the 18th century. That quote from Douglas Kahn. Then the second paragraph. There were some things this music didn't do. It didn't dramatically change direction or settle in at one spot or exhibit any real lateral dynamic. Although streams do not run uphill, they will settle into pools, plunge over a cliff, fade into other streams, or violently take other streams into themselves. And some can even appear to gradually run uphill. Multiple lines could have joined the sweep, and the sweep could have angled out from the proscenium and added other dimensions. These limitations were good because it meant that this group had plenty of other directions to explore. Having made a huge breakthrough, they had only scratched the surface. That seems to be the true test of artistic innovation. So, perhaps inaugurating something close to a musicology under influence, Kahn discovered a song that, for our judgment, I mean in a correct frame of mind, did not exist as such until Kahn invented it. What he experienced resulted from a bunch of scattered residual acoustic items put together by his altered conscience. It is not different from my experience with the electroacoustic circuit, when we, me and all the other stuff surrounding me, assembled 5 items and then discovered the flycatcher. Who would nowadays deny Kant's experience as less scientific and or not musical? The fact of being under influence doesn't change too much of reality and doesn't remove from the analyzed piece, even if not a piece, its musical power. Being just a non-composed thing does not prove it can't sound musical to someone. The influence of drugs on perception points to the subjectivity of this chemical technology as it leaves traces of this technology. I believe drugs should not be considered less of a medium than optical fiber. So, nearly finishing. I ask to take note of the interesting use of the word perspective by Kahn to describe his experience. It is the frame of mind one believes to be in, entitling one the condition of objectivity. Perspective is a medium, a technique of drawing and architecture, which emerged and became celebrated from the Renaissance to nowadays, now governing and supposedly natural reproduction of the visual field. The 20th century saw a revival of this illusion in its sonorous musical transposition in the so-called stereophony and later the 3D. Today, with the retroactive sight that our times have permitted, we may propose an understanding of the Cartesian philosophy as related to another altered state of mind, stimulated not so much by means of rail transport like Valéry, non-existent at his time. This philosopher knew well the visual tool capable of providing a stereoscopic sense, leading to the separation between subject and object, the perspectiva that Brunelleschi and other Renaissance artists rediscovered and diffused many years before the issue of the discourse on methods. Without this device, I'm sorry for the pigment, for the pixels. Huh? Without this device, by which means the artist sees the vanishing point through a flat mirror, Brunelleschi would have hardly created the foundations for the Renaissance perspective. And without it, the Renaissance culture would not have adopted the vanishing point, within which one could focus on the object, separated it from the rest and from oneself, so as to constitute the couple subject-object foundation of the Cartesian rationalism. Many authors agree, and even René Descartes' own biographer, that the great philosopher mathematician's Discours de la Méthode was influenced by three famous dreams that happened during the night of 10th November 1619. Adrien Baillet, the biographer, narrates the dreams as if they were his own, with a precision that can only be due to having been told by Descartes himself. There were three very complex dreams, but for this text, I will direct my attention expressly to Baillet's own words as he looks for the possible sources of Descartes' dreams. This last imagination had certainly something of an enthusiasm, so much so that it would lead one to believe that Monsieur Descartes had something to drink before going to sleep. Actually, it was St. Martin's Eve, a day in which it was a custom to faire de la débauche, cair na gandaia, at the place where he was in France. But he assures us that he spent the evening and the whole journey in sobriety, and that he was already without drinking for 3 months. He adds that the genie who excited his enthusiasm, a condition he felt warmed his brain for some days, foretold these dreams even before he went to bed, and that the human spirit had no part to play. But in a more rational guise, one puts less strain in belief by simply inferring that Descartes' malin génie, the counter-incentive that helped him build his philosophy, had more chances to appear in dreams when the dreamer was mediated by spirited technologies, which, by the way, constituted one of St. Martin's notorious knowledge, especially as white wine is concerned. He was a specialist. So, concluding, it is out of my purpose and out of our reach to stop this continuous process of intoxication whereby we become the most mixed media. I'm not against being intoxicated. I am, or we are all now, so intoxicated by all sorts of media that one would not know where to start and where to draw a line between us and the media. From the alarm clock and toothpaste in the morning until the last elevator noise in the night, we find time to spend with Twitter and with buses, with TV sets during breakfast at the hotel, etc. How can one be against all that? Time consuming. It's too much, and perhaps we should try not to feel overwhelmed. We may be rewarded whenever intoxication is at least acknowledged and identified. For this to happen, one of the best medicines, another toxic, is to remove ourselves from the natural state we believe to be and become somehow out of phase. For instance, when we invert the phase of one of the channels of a stereo recording, the notion of natural space is destroyed. But other weird spatial feelings give birth. A sensation of unnatural is created, enough to call the attention to the technographic trace of the stereo system that the music industry started to sell in the 50s and we naturalized in our electroacoustic pieces, especially in the soundscape genre. Once out of phase, the recognition of the effect may induce the artist to ask him, herself, how much of Brunelleschi or even Descartes and objectivity he or she wants to keep propagating in works of art. Art, supposedly, is the field where we are not only allowed to, we actually should make questions instead of accept all things as we might believe they are. Thank you. Mhm. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rodolfo, for your presentation. I want to take this opportunity to open the floor for questions. If someone want to pose their question in Portuguese, I'll do my best to translate and pose the question to Rodolfo. Anyone?
Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much for this paper. It's very intriguing and interesting. And it's just simple. Well, it's not that simple, I think, but a simple, short question. Item, you said, like, you defined the bird call as item in the more positive
Mhm.
way. Is item like an equivalent of sonic object in Schaeffer's idea? And if it's so, it's like how much is it like the same or different? Thank you.
I very much like the idea of sound object, but I try not to use it because it's still separating. It's still making, telling about an experience of subject and object. Uh, and there are other things about sound object in Schaeffer, which is related to his notion of écoute réduite, which for me it's not réduite at all. It's écoute réduite is something very creative, beautiful. Schaeffer was a poet when he invented that. Um, so the idea of sound object can imply the use and the acceptance of all of it. So that's why I preferred item.
Thokozani Mhlambi from South Africa. Perhaps it's just only a comment, but there's a slippage that you mentioned when you quoted Said and you spoke of the colonial intrusion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it got me thinking about how sound, in a way, is almost always emerging, already hijacked by music,
Mm-hmm.
and what you termed the search for composable items.
Mm-hmm.
And my worry about that is that it may hinder the appreciation of the phenomenon in its own integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And and that for me is it's almost like sound has taken strain. It is out of phase in terms of the reality that is required to elaborate for us. And yeah, so I'll just leave it there for now.
I understood the first question. Not,
No, it's just a comment.
okay.
I guess I'm saying I'm thinking aloud because
Mm-hmm.
there's a sadness that for me comes as I'm hearing your paper, not
Mm-hmm.
because of you, but
Mm-hmm.
because of the limitations that I find myself and I
Mm-hmm.
find ourselves limited in. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and my suspicion that it might come also from the one genealogy of technology that we're tracking from people like Schaefer and so forth. I suspect that that limitation might also be coming from that inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
But my suspicion also that it might be coming out because of our backgrounds, that we come in here as composers,
Mm-hmm.
as whatever, sound artists. So we're
Mm-hmm.
already listening for composable
Mm-hmm.
items.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yes, we have to try to. I don't think that what I'm going to say is must be followed by everyone, but I believe that I feel very much that my own interest in sound. Uh, I was going to show the sounds that would move me. Uh, for instance, at the beginning of the presentation, for instance, two sounds, one by the arara, this is the big parrot, the red one, and another bird called japu preto, which is a beautiful black bird with yellow feathers. Uh, they make incredible noise, incredible sound. And this experience changed my opinion, and I recognized, I acknowledged this attitude that I was having at the beginning. So thank you. It's like when we go after the bird sounds, we are not. We should perhaps adopt an attitude of an anthropologist, but the anthropologist who is trying to understand his own place as an anthropologist.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Rodolfo. I think Fernando has
Thank
a
you
couple.
very much. Thank you, Christina. She's related to us. She studied sound engineering.
Oh,
So
okay. So we have a couple of housekeeping notes regarding lunch, right? Yeah, yeah. So Fernando and Marcos will. Marcos is here. They will be your guides. So if you want to follow them, they will take